Joan, tell me about the book you are reading beside your bedside. Can you explain the title to me?
Yes, it's a very unusual title. It's called Northern Soul, and it's nothing to do with the soul group in Wigan, whatever it was a few years ago. It's about um, football, punk, and Jesus, but entitled Northern Soul, because it's a northern person, and it's by David O'Brien.
And can you tell me a bit about the author, David O'Brien?
Yes, this is a biography, autobiography of him.
Okay.
So it starts then actually when he was 9. So a little bit about his family to sort of get you into the theme of the book.
Okay.
He had 3 sisters and a brother, and they struggled in life. It was a very difficult upbringing with the relationship between his mother and her husband, etc. There was a drunken husband. There were rows, arguments, roughs, sarcasm, soured relationships. Siblings were fine though. David had a nervous disposition, but his siblings supported and helped each other. There were 7 kids in the family, but one little brother died aged 7, Tommy. He was killed actually. He had no church or Sunday school background. The only exposure was copies of The Watchtower delivered by the Jehovah's Witnesses. David was diagnosed with a heart murmur at 9, and he went to a normal school, but his family still protected him, and then they moved to a bigger house. At 14, David joined the Army Cadets, but he was ridiculed by others with his haircut, and he felt awkward in school. He had no confidence at all, and he was absent from school. There were sick notes forged, truancy, and he went watching Manchester United training because he lived nearby in Scotland, in Stockport. He lived a chaotic hermit-style life for months. He went to summer camp in Scotland and became a sort of Crocodile Dundee type within the football scene. He had no belief in God or any expectations of it. It was like a cork drifting in water. He had the confidence of a gnat. All these misdemeanors, he was as he pratted around in school, he was resulted in detention for him, and this detention engaged in a punishment of a library for 6 weeks, but he loved it. So there were changes afoot here. While he was in this library duty, he had history, geography, art, and he had a thirst for knowledge. At the end of his 6th year, the kids were getting jobs, and he obtained one as a mail order conveyor belt operator in the local family supermarket, stacking shelves.
Wow, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing story so far. So what happened after that?
In the 1970s, he left school, started work, and went to the pub with friends from Reddish, who he'd grown up with. He didn't like disco music or platform shoes, nor was he impressed with girls. He was reminded of his mother's experience with his dad and drinking, so that brought his childhood up again. So he kept himself to himself. But punk music burst on the scene then, and he was implemented with it somewhat. His hair was cropped to a number 2 with a Phillips shave razor to become a skinhead, and he took beatings. He became a hooligan element and got hurt. He broke his ankle and his Achilles tendon on one occasion in these beatings. There were 6 weeks in plaster and he's off work. His boss discovered his sickness but let him off to keep his job. He's still a loner after all these trials. I was a lost young man in a big scary world looking for an identity, he said. He was searching for God, but unbeknown to him, God was searching for him.
Yes.
He left school with low grades and no real skills and bleak prospects. He decided to join the army, but as I mentioned earlier, he had a heart valve problem, so he was prevented from doing so. He was in and out of work for 2 days, drifting rebelliousness and unemployment. He was now aged 20 and asking questions and searching for New Testament, self-examination. He said about Isaiah 1:18, though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Following his Bible reading and tracts, he came across a lot of tracts. People seemed to be giving him tracts, so in a way God was working in his life, I think of it then. And he talked to the ceiling a lot in his bedroom. He doesn't know why, but he did. One of these days when he was talking up to the ceiling, he wasn't really, was he? And described a powerful presence descending from above, peace coming over him wave after wave. It's beautifully described in the book. He didn't tell anyone what had happened, and he carried on a routine as normal: pub, football, punk concert, drink, for a while. He's like a private spirit in spiritual life, but unchanged outwardly. Now, in 1983, he was 22, and he was once again in jail arrested for drinks and football, etc.
Right.
Private wilderness. He had a growing conviction. These tracts that was given mounted up, and he replied to one at a local church. His mates had noticed a change in him also. He was learning and developing his church life, which gave him a longing and concern for those things outside the church. In his former life, his former life was replaced by a Christian ghetto kind of thing.
Wow. You can really see here, Joan, that his life had started to change, can't you? Completely different.
And he knew it had, but yet he felt he couldn't do anything about it. He was so kind of skeptical, cynical, and unbelieving, and all the things that I said at the beginning. He still had that in him, didn't he?
Yeah. And I can tell by the way you're reading this and telling me about this story that it has inspired you yourself as well. And it's inspiring to see how God can change a person's life, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Carry on.
Right. He met Alison, who was to be his wife then. They were comfortable together, and it was important in respect of his growing desire to go into full ministry by them. Based on Luke 4, verses 14 to 24, was a vision that Alison had had for many years. She'd also been told many years earlier by her Sunday school teacher, one day you will marry a vicar. At this stage, David was still introverted and self-skeptical. They married in May 1993 and lived in a small terraced house in Stockport. He then went to study theology at Nazarene College in Manchester on a 4-year course. Nervousness prevailed during his first year back at studying, and he wondered if he could stand in a pulpit and preach. It was self-doubt again, wasn't it?
Definitely.
Then he went to Moorlands College in Dorset. 3-year study without clear destination at the end. That was all he could focus on. During this time now, his previous life of coping was now being replaced by God's provisions. Second year of college led to a 5-week placement in an urban priority area. His mission was Lifelink, which took place in Blackpool, my hometown, where I'm speaking from. Finishing college without definitive direction, Alison was offered a job in Lancaster. So he attended the St Thomas's Church, where George Fisher, who guided him and involved him in preaching and leading, was. In 2002, Alison became pregnant with their son Josh. A week before his birth, she became unwell, and they took her to hospital, and they said, go and get some clothes because she'll have to stay in, because this was kind of serious. In the meantime, between David coming home, his phone rang at home, and she was actually being delivered of this child in C-section. He had meconium aspiration, which is a tar substance, and baby poo being ingested into the baby before he's born, so it's clogging all the lungs up. This was a very, 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 very hairy time for him and scary. There were lots of prayers offered up from the churches for him. He was transferred to Liverpool the next day, along with his mother, and they were there. They spent 6 weeks. So they sat with Josh, reading a children's Bible each day, to his special care in a room. And so Alison was led from one end of the hospital where the mothers are to the other end of the hospital every day. So David had to push them there, but that they pulled through. Then when they came out, life was sort of getting back to normal. Her scar was healing, etc. And then she went to see a friend in Denton where they'd lived. While she was there, she had a fall then, and she was carrying Joshua in the baby basket on one hand, and she fell, and he wasn't injured, mercifully. And they checked that, so that was another thing that befell them. And then a few months later, in January 2004, David was called to the hospital for a heart valve to be fitted. Ordination preparations were then in place, excuse me, as was his curacy, but they had peace waiting for the operation. He was discharged 8 days after, and 8 weeks later could work again. Ordination was in June, a new valve, a new lease of life, and a new vocation. He served his curacy at Bispam area with the Dean. He describes that his sermons were not academic feasts, but he preached from this heart that he just think like. Here the book ends. This is up to 2015, and this is the print date of the book.
Okay.
But since then, he's been away and on a placement in Shrewsbury, I think it is, for 3 years, and then he came to us at this the church, St Thomas's Church again. So it's been full circle with him, really. He came here earlier on and did a life link thing. So just think about the things that has gone on in this story that he elaborates on beautifully in the book. And so he's been with us 2 years, I think. 3 years now, I forget which, because it's the pandemic. I don't know, my mind's a bit fried over that way. And he's really settled down into us, and this is where really God does want him to be. We're sure about that, you know. So and it's very, very why I wanted to sort of bring this story was that at my age now, I'm looking back over things that happened when I was young.
Of course.
I came to know the Lord in 1983. It was 86, I think it was, actually. But I've been at church all my life. I played the organ, Sunday school, and all the rest of it. My grandparents, where my mother was, etc. And I'm the same as David was. But in that interim period when he didn't kind of let on to anybody that he'd been sort of saved, I went through that as well. But when I think back now at my childhood, God was protecting me, and the little things at Sunday school, yes, they were there, and I could see it all now. It was as if the scales fell off my eyes when I came, and I knew then, right from the year dot, you know, that my, you know, about my salvation kind of thing. So it's so wonderful. It's just like it's just like David's life in a way, kind of thing. So
it really is. It really is, isn't it? It's really spoken to you, this book, and you've thought about your own life through it. So that's been a really interesting to listen to this story today, Joan. So to close with, what would you say to encourage others to read this book?
I would say that just following this brief outline of it, that it's just so interesting when you get into the descriptions of it right from his young childhood. You can get in the room where he's talking. You can really, because it's such an easy language to understand. It's not just full of descriptions of things. He gets in there with you. And at the end of each chapter of here, he either looks back as a sort of a kind of reflection of this portion and whatever he's reading about, or he gives a poem in his poetic language, and the super poetic verses that he gives as well. It is really encouraging and inspiring. I could do it again. In fact, I've sent a copy to the Philippines, you know, to get a contact there, kind of thing, you know.
Yeah,
that's brilliant. It would really bless anyone to read this booklet.
Yeah. Joan, thank you for sharing with us today about the book by your bedside. And can you just show us the book one more time for people who'd like to read this book? Northern Soul Football Punk Jesus by David O'Brien. Thank you, Joan. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeannie. Thank you.